All right, now we're moving on to fundamental number 6, which is the
Mix.
Bridging the gap, okay? So we've talked about chest voice and head voice and how they're two different coordinations, how we want to use both of them, but how sometimes there's this nasty break in between them, and it's hard to navigate sometimes between those two.
And I would say this is a big reason why a lot of people, when they come in for voice lessons, this is one of the things that they notice the most about their voice, right?
Right.
Is they notice they have this big hitch in the middle, usually, or there's part of their voice that's missing, right?
Yeah, or they can't sing low notes or they can't sing high notes. And we know now the reason why sometimes they can't sing low is because maybe they're not fully using their chest voice, or sometimes they can't sing high because they don't know where the coordination is for the high notes. And so now we've established that we need a chest voice and a head voice. And once you have both of those going for you, not necessarily connected, but working, functioning, and you know where they are and what it feels like, that's when we get to start bridging the gap between the two. We can find that chest voice, that head voice, mix the two together in the middle, have a beautiful transition between the two so it sounds like one voice all the way through. And so all mix it's the coordination of the transition between the two. That's it. That's all it is.
So what does it really sound like when you don't have that coordination, right? When you aren't mixing, what does that typically sound like?
Okay, so there's kind of 4 different vocal categories that we put people into. Obviously, there can be some outliers there, but generally most people fall into one of these categories, okay? So there's people who just sing in chest voice, and they don't know how to get into head voice at all, and they pull their chest voice coordination as high as they possibly can in pitch until they just can't go anymore, and they kind of hit a ceiling. And then it's like, wow, I just can't sing high, right? So let me give you an example of somebody who is a chest puller.
Okay.
So they start in their talking voice, right?
Yep.
And they're in their talking coordination. See, it's the same thing as me talking to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then they, like I said, they try to take that coordination to as high as their voice will let them until it just doesn't go anymore.
Okay.
So they hit a ceiling.
That is so loud.
Well, that's because I'm shouting at you.
Right.
And that's what happens when you try to take that chest coordination all the way to the top. So I didn't switch over into head voice. And
Right.
you could hear that as I got higher, it got pitchy,
Yeah.
right? Because my voice was straining
Yeah.
to hit those notes, and so that strain pulls the pitch off, right? And there was a definite ceiling where it was like, nope, it's not going any higher. You could hear the piano keep going, but the voice was not.
And I would imagine this is what a lot of guys do, right? And this is why a lot of guys like blow out their voices.
Oh, absolutely. You see this a ton after the voice change in adolescence, specifically, right? Because these poor boys go through this massive voice change, and it's like they forget how to have that littler coordination for those higher notes. And they have this big floppy voice that's just wanting to be low. And so, yeah, they hit that ceiling and then they just push as hard as they possibly can. And I know voice teachers who tell them to, they're like, just push it harder. You'll get there to the top. And it's like, yeah, you're literally shouting.
Right.
Like, that's not healthy. And that's not even talking about healthy screaming, because that's totally possible. Yeah. That's a whole other thing. We're talking about someone who's literally like fight or flight shouting at you.
And we actually see this with a lot of our touring bands, guys who are in touring bands.
Lots of rock singers.
Who they're too cool for voice lessons until they keep blowing out their voices and then they can't finish up tours because they have no voice partway through, right?
And guys, I'm a rock singer. I was in a band for a really long time. I did go on a little tour. I had a recording contract. I played at Warped Tour in 2009. So I get you rock singers who think that you can't have power if you do this. It's totally not true. This is going to give you way more range and more power to be able to get into the higher notes, and you're not going to blow out your voice. So I think we covered chest pullers, right?
So what's another example?
And one other thing, we see a lot of chest pullers in Broadway music. People are trying to belt really high and not switching into that coordination, and so they're just smashing their voices. It's not a fun thing. So the second one is someone who stays in head voice only, which is really interesting because that coordination is different than our talking voice. You would think that you would take your speaking coordination into singing, but you see it a lot with women who are in choirs or young girls who are in choirs, because you have to blend your voice. So you kind of get into this breathier tone. And so this coordination, the reason it sounds so breathy in my talking voice is because it's actually meant to be up here. Okay, it's meant to be higher. And so, and that's the notes that it really keys into. So what happens, though, is if you stay in your head voice coordination for your entire range, you get really breathy tones on the bottom because you're not using your talking voice. And it's just kind of woofy and breathy all the way through. It can be very pretty, and it is useful to do this in choir. It's not necessarily bad for you or wrong, right? You're just not going to get the sounds you need for popular music, or especially for musical theater if you're really going to try to belt it, right? So that sounds like this. It's just very breathy on the top. There it is. So that's someone who's in their head voice. When they're singing in the bottom. So if you feel like when you're singing your low notes and you just can't get power in your voice, a lot of the time it's because you're in your head voice coordination when you should be in your chest voice.
Sweet. So we got people who stay in their chest voice, people who stay in their head voice.
And then you have people who flip. So this is a cool place to be. We like flippers because they're people who understand their chest voice and their head voice. You can feel both coordinations. You just might not know how to transition them yet. And so you can hear like that little flip or turnover in the voice. And this is what that sounds like.
And I think a lot of people fall into that category, right? Because they kind of get that squeak in the middle, or
especially boys with voice changes. If they let it flip into falsetto on the top, or they get that really powerful squeak.
You hear that a lot in that spot, right? Yeah. Because there's certain notes where you're transitioning through that, and it is very difficult. Yeah. Unless you've mastered the mix.
Mix. So you guys remember that all mix is the coordination for the transition between the two. It just makes it so that we have this nice seamless transition so that we're not hearing the change, right? So then that sounds like this. And all that is my foundation. So I haven't put any color on that. I'm not using my vocal acoustics to make it warm or bright or anything. That's just the foundation. And the cool thing about that is the pitch lines right up. It's easy. It's funny because when your voice is balanced like that, it's easier to sing. And that's a nice G up through the top. That's a Celine Dion note, So it's really cool to start to get that sound to come together. And what you notice too is that the quality of the sound doesn't change. That's kind of an exciting thing too. So then you can learn how to really lean into that, or you can make it really quiet and soft. You can still choose to go into more of a breathy falsetto on the top for style if you want to, but it's going to give you all of the qualities and sounds that you need to have that one consistent sound all the way through your voice without strain.
So this one is fundamental 6, right? But how important is it to have the other fundamentals that we've talked to up until this point down before you can really mix?
Well, there's actually no way you can achieve a true mix unless all the other things are balanced. And that's why we talked about them first, because ideally we want to get this one voice lining up as quickly as possible. But if you can't sing on pitch, that's a problem, right? We address that first because we have to make sure that the ear and the voice are working together. And then we have the breathing and the airflow, the inhalation and the exhalation, and making sure that that is then balanced with the muscles, so that everything is balanced through the air and muscle. And then we get our centered vowel to, again, balance everything out. And what that does is it puts everything into alignment to then say, okay, what is my range? I've got my chest and head voice. Okay, we're in alignment. Now we can mix. And if we're missing any of those critical pieces, the mix really isn't possible. A true, clean, strain-free mix.
So I've heard you say a couple times, like, connection is the key, right? Like, but what does that mean?
So what we want to do is just make sure that when we're in the bottom of our voice, in our talking voice, that we have a true talking voice down there. It's really easy for people to get into the bottom and almost be in chest voice. It's really close. But it's not fully there. It's not fully there. Hello. Ah. See, there's my talking voice. Yeah. It's not heavier than that. It's not a, I'm trying to get like a super big sound on the bottom.
Right.
But it's definitely fully connected. So connected voice is that connection of my talking voice is my chest voice. I'm going to start with that as my foundation. And really making sure that that is existing and working. Because if that total connection to your chest voice is happening, and that talking voice and chest voice are one when you're singing in the bottom, then it makes it about 1,000,000 times easier to start making that mix work up through the top. But if you're not starting from true chest voice on the bottom or true head voice on the top, there's no way you can find the balance between them.
And earlier, in some of the earlier fundamentals, we talked about this concept about balance, right? We talked about you have to have kind of this balanced combination of airflow and muscle usage, and also using like the stability that you get with certain vocal acoustics or vowels, right?
You're kind of vowels.
You're leaning into that for the stability in your voice. Right. So how do those two kind of play into each other?
The reason you can mix between chest and head voice is because everything is in alignment and balanced, right? To achieve that coordination, all of those things have to be functioning. That airflow, the muscle, they have to be happy together. They're married, they're happy. And then that centered vowel comes in and just gives even more stability to that. So if you're trying to go through the middle with a big bright vowel that throws out all your air and everything's unbalanced, you're going to start to get those breaks in your voice and everything. But if you get that air and that muscle and that vowel in alignment, then it just will shoot right up through there.
And see, I feel like this is one of those things where a lot of people kind of take it for granted. They think it should be easier than what it really is, because you have to have so many things down to really make that work.
It's frustratingly simple. Right. Because I'm like, wow, all you have to do is have air, muscle, and vowels, and then you can sing with a beautiful mix. It's like, no, you have to have all of that keyed in. So well, and there are so many exercises we can do for every single one of those fundamentals to get them so keyed in, even though right now we're just kind of breezing over it so you can start to feel things. But really, to get to the point of having a really solid mix, and to the point where it's not just, okay, I'm feeling this coordination, but now I'm strengthening this coordination and I'm making muscle memory so that everything I sing is having this coordination, because we are building a skill with this. You at some point have to have a coach who can be your ears to say, okay, let's tweak this, let's tweak this, let's tweak this. Because first of all, like we've said, every voice is different. Second of all, we're talking about, we're making broad sweeping motions of what singing is.
Right.
So we can get an overview and an understanding of it. But to be real, this is like all very fine-tuned stuff. And as you get more elite, you need a coach to help you be more elite.
Right. It's the little nuances that make it all work, right? And it's really mastering that is required. So here's kind of maybe a stupid not a stupid question, but does it really matter if you can mix? Like, can you still be a functional singer without being able to mix? Can't you just, like a lot of people do, flip, right? And you hear that in a lot of popular music. So
well, it's interesting because I feel like the flip came about in popular music because it was a necessity for people, because they couldn't sing those notes, and so they decided to flip them. And it became a style thing that we accepted, which is really cool.
Right, like you hear guys flip into falsetto all the time.
But now we understand that it is a style choice, and a lot of the pop singers, especially guys who are still flipping like that, they're not doing it all the time. They actually have good technique and can sing through those notes if they want to, but sometimes they choose to flip. So there is a difference between people who do it out of necessity and people who do it out of choice. And as a coach, as a vocal coach, I always want it to be a choice for you. I don't want it to be something that you have to do. And just because you get your mix down, that doesn't mean you can't do that stuff. You can absolutely still do that stuff. Like I've said before, all it does is open up your toolbox to be able to do more. So that if you want to have a power note, you can, or you can flip. But I mean, there are people in the industry that you can listen to singer for singer who definitely have awful technique. They have terrible technique, but they have a really cool sound. and they've made a career off of that cool sound. And I mean, that's you, that's great, that's cool. But if you want to be able to master your voice and truly be able to use every facet of your voice, then you need to, train it just like any high level professional does. But here's the other thing I'll throw in there. Don't mistake people who don't get voice lessons for people who don't work really, really hard, because those people are still getting rep and practicing like crazy, even if they don't have that technique. They're still putting a ton into it.
But in this video series, we're talking about mastering vocal technique.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're at the point in each episode where I ask you, is there any last thing that you want to mention about mix before we get into the exercise?
The cool thing about mix is it allows people to sing in any genre of music. Because if you're thinking that we're just baking a cake of technique here, which is what we're doing, right? We're building the foundation so that your voice is optimally functioning. The cool thing about that, because we kind of talked about this in acoustics, you can then shape your sound to be whatever you want to be. If you want to go, audition for a musical, you can go do that, and then you can turn around and play Battle of the Bands. You can absolutely do that. And that's what's so cool about this, is it does give you a lot of options for diversity in your sound. It's best if eventually you key in on that, because then you can get really good at one thing. But it's very cool because you're not pigeonholed into one thing. And I have heard singers come into my studio who do 3 or 4 different genres. It's usually our high school students, because they are in choir, and then they are in the musical, and then they are playing Battle of the Bands, and they're doing all these things, and they are doing them well. And so if you're not sure what genre you want to be in, this is very cool to be, because then you just understand your voice and how to use it wherever you may go. Or you may be like a career karaoke singer who's singing all different kinds of karaoke.
Right.
I mean, whatever that is, but it's just incredible, because it really allows you to have total exploration with your voice.
All right. And with that, let's get into the exercise so people can
start to feel a mix. Okay, we've talked about so many things leading up to this, but now let's see if we can start to feel this mix come together a little bit more, okay? So last time we talked about range, we talked about the hey timbre and the whoop timbre. So now if you're getting really good at those things and feeling those two things independently, now let's see if we can start to tie it together. Now, what I'm about to show you does take some finesse. It might take you some time and practice to do this. It's not something that you're going to get right out the gate, okay? Sometimes it takes people weeks to get it nice and fluid. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with your whoop, and then we're going to slide it down into the hey timbre to where you feel hey, right? So that it feels like it's coming back into your talking voice. And I know a lot of you are like, hey, I'm not even singing yet. But the thing that's so cool about primal sounds is that if you can get your voice to do this in a primal way, then we can totally apply it to a song. Okay, we can show you how to do it with exercises. We can start to feel it moving through in scales and into your songs. So just stick with me on this. So we're going to go back to the primal sounds that we used in your range tip, and we're going to get that siren to come together. So if we start with whoop, woo, right? And then we slide it all the way down until you feel that hey feeling in the bottom. So it sounds like this. Woo! And there's the bottom of my talking voice right there, right? And you notice that what I'm trying to do is try to get them to connect. I want them to be nice and smooth and connected. Now, at first, you might feel a little flip in there. Woo! Woo! And that's okay. Or it's kind of woofy on the top. Woo! And then it comes in really heavy on the bottom. Don't worry. It's just practice. And remember, it's finesse with this. We're going to go back to our airflow. We want the airflow to stay nice and even all the way through, because sometimes we throw way more air through the top and then we kind of die down at the bottom. Or vice versa. We don't have enough air through the top. Woo! And then we hit the bottom of our voice with a ton. Woo! Right? So remember, we want to get that nice deep breath. Expand the rib cage. Sip of air. And then we're going to try to keep that air even. So I'm actually going to throw my hand out this way as I do my whoop down to my hey. Woo! And we're going to keep it nice and even all the way through. And that's what we're aiming for. So You can kind of course correct along the way. If you're feeling like one of them is out of balance from another, check in on your air, check in on your breath. Make sure that we're feeling that all the way through. And then remember too, these are primal sounds. So the second you lose the actual primitive side of it and you try to just make a sound, that's going to throw out your balance as well. So remember, we're excited when we whoop, and we're talking in a big crowd when we're doing our hey, right? So it's just the idea of the sensations, and it's going to start with you doing them individually and then trying to connect them. And again, this is going to take time, but once you get that nice and smooth and connected, that's a mix. That's essentially your mix right there. Okay? All right, let's move on to the next fundamental.
We hope you guys are enjoying the Fundamentals of Singing video series here on YouTube. If you guys want more free resources on how we help our artists here at InvictiVox, please check out the InvictiVox Radio podcast on YouTube or any major podcast platform.